I've been studying this language all these years and never relying on my personal experience.
Hmm.
And another thing that this book talks about is your first language. A lot of language teachers, a lot of Japanese language teachers around the world will say, don't use your first language when you're learning this.
Right.
But these
Like
guys
what?
are saying, wait a minute, this is where your inventory is.
Right. What else do you have to fall
What,
back
what
on?
else? Well, this is where your inventory is. You don't
Right.
use that inventory. You've got nothing.
Yeah.
Words on a page, words you don't understand on a page.
Uh, and I guess there's a sort of a it's I think I know where it comes from. As a as an English teacher, I hear the same mistakes over and over again because
Mm-hmm.
most of my students are Bulgarian. Bulgarian is their first language, and so they
Mm-hmm.
tend to make the same sorts of mistakes all the time. I can too speak English, and I think a lot of English teachers, a lot of language teachers get annoyed after a while, and they're like, "I know this is that dastardly first language interfering with your scale. If only you could wipe your mind clean and be like a baby, then I could just pour my language into you." Uh, but you can't do that.
It's true. It's a secret belief, right? It's a secret belief. It's out there, but as soon as you
Mhm.
say it out loud, it sounds perfectly ridiculous.
It sounds ridiculous, right? But like in Hollywood movies, this happens all the time when they need the main character to start speaking a language quickly for plot reasons.
Yeah.
Uh, so it's this assumption that we take into it without interrogating the assumption. Uh, the other one is they talk about this in Becoming Fluent, that a lot of people go into learning a language with the unconscious goal of passing for a person who speaks that language. You know,
Yes.
and I,
Yeah.
I definitely had that in Bulgarian, where I was like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if people thought that I was Bulgarian? Uh, and
Somehow I could never work with that myth in my own
right.
situation.
So if you're in Japan and you're not Asian, then you're disabused of that pretty quickly.
Yes, exactly, exactly. But I have to tell you that I have been walking down the street many times and thought to myself, "Oh, that guy who's Japanese looks like a black guy in New York,"
Right.
and because the appearance of the Japanese population is actually quite diverse,
Yeah.
and I have been mistaken for Japanese on a number of occasions.
All right. All
Go
right.
figure.
Maybe I have been correctly identified as not Bulgarian on a number of occasions as well.
I have to say that's happened to me too.
Well, no, it's interesting because this was without me speaking, where I'm waiting for a taxi or something, and the taxi
Uh,
comes up, and the taxi driver starts speaking to me in German. He's like, "Oh, I thought you were German," just
ah,
based on how you look. Um, and interestingly, that has happened to me less often as I lived here longer. So
I have
it
something fascinating to say about that. I
it
mean,
fascinate me.
it fascinates me anyway. So I'm, I am to a certain extent clearly not Japanese. When I was first here 10 or 15 years ago, some whatever, if somebody was walking down the street and realized suddenly that they were lost, they would quickly look around for someone to ask. They
Mhm.
would look right at me, and you
Mhm.
could see them in their
Really.
eyes saying, "Not that guy." And then they go to somebody else, right? In the last year, I have been stopped 3 times by Japanese people asking for instructions to various places. And yeah, and the last time left me just standing there stunned. We have a delivery service here, package delivery, like almost like the postal service, called Tuck Your Bin. They're everywhere, and their trucks are everywhere, and Tuck Your Bin drivers know the city like taxi drivers, maybe better than taxi drivers. And a Tuck Your Bin driver stopped and asked me where the nearest bathroom was.
Wow.
And I knew.
And you could tell him. And, well,
I told him.
and could you tell him? All right, very good. That's
I
even
told
better.
him. And as he drove off, I thought, how in the world did that happen?
That is not a bad goal as language learning goals go. I want to be able to be stopped on the street in some random part of my neighborhood and asked about some random place. And number one, someone asks me. Number two, I know where that place is. And number three, I'm able to tell them so that they understand where it is.
Well,
that's a pretty good test for language.
Yeah, to our audience, I would say that while this may sound on the face of it like a kind of trivial, funny thing, and it is that, it's also really very, very significant. And because something happens to you when you're living in a country and absorbing the language, because absorbing the language is not only an intellectual process, it's a physical process.
Yeah.
You're learning body language, you're learning all these things. And you and I are maybe learning things that we don't see, we don't recognize them as things to pick up, but we are indeed picking them up. And sometimes I notice that I have picked up something.
Like what? Like a kind of body language, or
well, there are a lot of
ideology, or what
physical gestures. Yeah, there are a lot of physical gestures that I've picked up.
Like
Yeah,
that.
this one. I
like that
one. Me. True, it's true. There's also verbal things that I've picked up, like so sometimes when you like, there are many shops like right around me. When I leave here, I may say goodbye or I'll be back soon to 3 or 4 shopkeepers. When I come back, they say welcome home. That's a Japanese custom.
Oh, cute. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it doesn't happen much else in the world, as I understand it. But in your own household, you would expect it, but you wouldn't expect it in the street.
Yeah, right.
But in a neighborhood where things are relatively fixed, when you leave, you say, I'll be back soon. I'm leaving and I'll be back soon.
Because you're going to come back tomorrow.
And when you leave and you say, I'll be back soon, they say, go and be back soon. And
right.
The language.
In the same way they would if they were your family in your house.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's one of the remarkable things about the social construct here. However, especially among men, when you do this often enough, there's nothing that drives you to use the actual words. It's kind of funny.
Okay.
So, when you come back, you might say in Japanese, tadaima, but what you actually might say after a while is, nah. And your neighbor's going to go, all right. And these are, this is real stuff.
So it's the tone of the word or the phrase without any of the actual sounds in there.
Without using,
who needs those letters?
Using the word or any of its parts, because that's also common here. In other words, a morning greeting, you can use a kind of formal one, or you can use an informal one, or you can use a very informal one, which is a contraction of the first two.
Yeah.
of a kind of violent contraction of the first word. And so
A collision.
a collision of the ends of the first, and so I mean those are real things. Or you can just make a noise.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
kind of remarkable, but these things kind of come over you, and you don't realize that they're happening until one day you say to yourself, you know something, I didn't say anything, I just made a noise. That's ridiculous.
Like that,
Exactly. But he made a noise too, so we're good.
which shows you, and this is something that they do talk about in becoming fluent, is they say pragmatics, the pragmatics
Yes.
of language use, where in fact, and they don't say this, but it is known that the majority of the information passing between people in a conversation is nonverbal.
Right. Yeah.
And so, like, if you boiled down all of the grammar and vocabulary, you would actually have a very small amount of the content of what they're saying.
Right.
And it's easy to get sidetracked by the words and the grammar, so that you forget about all of this enormous foundation of body language and tone of voice and facial expression and shared context that underpins all of the stuff that we actually say.